Good morning, everyone, again. Here we are. I want to talk to you today about a subject that's close to home for many of us. Little pun there if you know the title of the sermon, it's on your bulletin. It's about home. I want to talk about home. And this is actually part of a series of sermons that I'm giving. But if you haven't heard the first one, which is all I've given so far, it's okay. This one's standalone. You don't have to know what went on to the other one. I gave a test to everybody. They passed it, so we moved on to this one. Not really. But in the first sermon, I asked the question, how does this earth fit as our home? And we decided not so well in many ways. Not so well. It is our home, and God's blessed us to be here. As we heard in the prayer, even about the offertory, we are very blessed in so many ways. But when you really get down and dig around into it, is this where we want to be forever? And the answer was not really, not under the conditions that we're under. But thankfully, God's got something better in store. And so we move on to the second sermon about how has God designed us for home. I titled this one, Home is Where the Heart Is. Just these little phrases that we hear around that mean something to us. And if you'll turn with me, if you've got a Bible, turn to Luke 15. If not, I'll be reading it to you as we go along. There's a story here about a fellow called the prodigal son. And I'd like to read it first of all out of a different version of the Bible. I use the NIV, the New International Version, and it doesn't really matter. But in this little booklet I have called Parable of the Dancing God by Baxter Kruger, he talks about the prodigal son. Parable, but he looks at it more from the viewpoint of the father. But he has in the first part of it, I'll just read out here, out of the Message version of the Bible, this parable. So if you want to follow along in your version or just listen to me read it in this version. This is verses 11 through 32. Good story. There was once a man who had 2 sons. The younger said to his father, "Father, I want right now what's coming to me." So the father divided the property between them. It wasn't long before the younger son packed his bags and left for a distant country. There, undisciplined and dissipated, he wasted everything he had. After he had gone through all his money, there was a bad famine all through that country, and he began to hurt. He signed on with a citizen there who assigned him to his fields to slop the pigs. He was so hungry he would have eaten the corn cobs in the pig slop, but no one would give him any. That brought him to his senses. He said, "All those farmhands working for my father sit down to 3 meals a day, and here I am starving to death. I'm going back to my father. I'll say to him, quote, 'Father, I've sinned against God. I've sinned before you. I don't deserve to be called your son. Take me on as a hired hand.'" End quote. He got right up, and he went home to his father. When he was still a long way off, his father saw him. His heart pounding, he ran out, embraced him, and kissed him. The son started his speech. "Father, I've sinned against God before you, and I don't deserve to be called your son ever again." But the father wasn't listening. He was calling to the servants, "Quick, bring a clean set of clothes and dress him. Put the family ring on his finger and sandals on his feet." Then he got a grain-fed heifer and roasted it. "We're going to feast. We're going to have a wonderful time. My son is here, given up for dead and now alive, given up for lost and now found." And they begin to have a wonderful time. I go on here with the story. It says, "All this time his older son was out in the field. When the day's work was done, he came in. As he approached the house, he heard the music and dancing. Calling over one of the houseboys, he asked what was going on. He told him, 'Your brother came home. Your father has ordered a feast, barbecued beef.'" We'll have that for lunch today here too. "Because he has him home safe and sound." The older brother stalked off in an angry sulk and refused to join in. His father came out and tried to talk to him, but he wouldn't listen. The son said, "Look how many years I've stayed here serving you, never giving you one moment of grief. But have you ever thrown a party for me and my friends? Then this son of yours, who has thrown away your money on whores, shows up and you go all out with a feast." His father said, Son, you don't understand. You're with me all the time, and everything that is mine is yours. But this is a wonderful time, and we had to celebrate. This brother of yours was dead, and he's alive. He was lost, and he's found. And I might add, he's home, because he said that earlier in the parable. He's home. There's so many things you can get out of that story, and if you've been around churchdom for a while, you've probably heard many sermons preached from the angle of the young son and the older son and the father, and about grace and mercy and about forgiveness and all kinds of things. But today I want to focus on just the aspect of what does that tell us about our home. There's a book that I'll be using here and there, and it's called The Return of the Prodigal Son. I'll do some quotes out of that. It's by Henri Nouwen, or Nouwen, depending on how you want to pronounce it. So that's an amazing little book there, lots to get out of that. But let's go back and look at just a few of the verses. We won't have time to pilfer through every little verse and dig into it, but we'll focus on the aspects of home. We go back to verse 11 where we started. It says, there was a man who had 2 sons, and the younger one said to his father, give me my share of the estate. So he divided the property between them, and not long after that, the younger son got together all he had and set off for a distant country, where he squandered his wealth. So that's how the story starts out. Where was the son when he asked for his inheritance? He was at home. That's where he'd grown up, right? I mean, home to him physically was maybe what home is to some of us. And I asked in my first sermon, what is your home? Is it where you currently live? Is it, if you conjure up the idea of a home, is it a house? Is it a house where you used to live, maybe where you grew up when you were younger? Is there a favorite place? Is it a certain town maybe where you really made connections? Or state of Texas, that's kind of a big home, but maybe you can say, well, Texas is home. So we can have all different kinds of home in our mind. But this young boy, a young man, was at his home. It's where he grew up. It's where he was taught, felt comfortable. He was familiar with it. He had some kind of feelings for it, I'm sure. At this point, he probably had reached the point, like a lot of teenagers and young people, where it's like, that's old and that's bad and I need to get away from this and I got to go to try out my freedom and sow my wild oats and I need to be on my own and I need to make my own choices, and Dad's always telling me what to do all the time and I need to get out of here. And that's kind of the idea I get of what went on in his life. And so the people that he had grown up around, his family, the workers in the vineyards, the people probably in the estates around, that they probably partied with and visited with and had activities with. That was all home. He decided to leave that and to go elsewhere. He left his home. But he had a lot of money in his pocket, and so off he went. I think one thing that he didn't appreciate about his home was the love that was there. And you see that later in the story. We don't hear about the mother. I'm not sure. Maybe she had died previously. It's a parable, so you don't have to bring every character into every story. But we know that there was a father, and we know that, as the story goes on, that he had a lot of love for his son. He probably was showing a lot of love right here. Not just when the son came back, but to divide up his estate before he was dead, before the father was dead. That was probably a little unusual thing, to pre-divide and pre-give part of your estate to somebody when you're still around and you could be using that, multiplying it. And maybe there would have been a lot more later if the son would have waited, but he didn't have the patience to wait, and he wanted it now, as it said in the Message version. And we're pretty human about that, to want it now. A lot of things we want now, and he did. But the love of the Father was just so amazing as you read through this story, and to divide it up and to give it to him and to send him on his way. And it doesn't indicate that he was angry or that he withheld. I mean, he gave it to him, and off the son went. And it must have been heartbreaking to the father, I would imagine. to see his younger son heading off down the driveway and off into the distance with some money in his pocket, but to know that there was an attitude there that was going to bring some consequences on him. But what do? You're the father and you love him. So the son had chosen to leave. He wasn't forced out in any way. He had the freedom to choose that. And so he was leaving more than just a building, a home. He was leaving his brother and his father and his friends, and he was leaving home in many ways. Like I said, it's kind of like a teen running away, maybe. Had some experience with that in our extended family, and people get tired and they sneak out a window and then they're gone. You go pick them at the police station later, or you hear they're living with a friend for a while. Just things happen. I had a friend that I'd grown up with, went to Boy Scouts with, and all kinds of stuff. We were really good buddies, and I got married, he got married, and he had 4 children, and they lived way out in the country, didn't really see people very much, and then one day we got a call and we found out that he had disappeared. He was gone. His wife didn't know where he was, and nobody knew where he was. He didn't tell anybody. They were doing searches down there on vehicles and horseback, and people, kind of one of these things where all the sheriff gets people out and they comb through the woods, and you go this way and your crew goes this way, and they're doing this thing for a day or two, and radios all over the place, and they can't find him anywhere. And they finally find his truck parked alongside the road off a ways. And they went, oh my goodness, he's been kidnapped or killed, he had run away. It had become too much responsibility. He had some mental crises. He broke, and he left, and he never came back to his family. He was alive. He was well, but he was gone. He had left home. He left his wife and 4 children and a house that he built himself, and disappeared. The sad part was his wife died soon thereafter, just from pneumonia, and he ended up with the children, and it's been a rocky road as him and a wife that he married later tried to raise the kids and all that. It didn't turn out well in many ways, but he ran away from home at a grown-up age even. Those things happen sometimes. I want to read to you out of this book, The Return of the Prodigal Son, and I'll just read a section here on page 37. He says, leaving home is then much more than a historical event bound to time and place. It is a denial of the spiritual reality that I belong to God with every part of my being, that God holds me safe in an eternal embrace, that I am indeed carved in the palms of God's hands and hidden in their shadows. Leaving home means ignoring the truth that God has fashioned me in secret, molded me in the depths of the earth, and knitted me together in my mother's womb. Leaving home is living as though I do not yet have a home and must look far and wide to find one. So he makes the parallel here between this physical boy leaving a physical home and a physical father to how we could be as human beings, and usually are at some stage in our life, spiritually, how we leave our spiritual father, sometimes short time, sometimes momentarily, sometimes longer periods of time. And he's saying that when we leave our relationship with our father, that what we're really doing is we're leaving home. We're saying, this is not where I want to be. This is overbearing. I don't understand. I'm ready to get out of here, and off we run. But that God, he says, is really holding us in an eternal embrace, and that God is really every part of our being, but at stages, at times, we don't know that, don't recognize it, and so we leave home. Interesting, he says, we leave home as though I do not yet have a home and must look far and wide to find one. Isn't that the way it is? Sometimes we don't see what's right around us. The grass is always greener concept, Here we are, really, we're in God's embrace. He is our Father. He's created us. He's done everything for us in Jesus Christ. He sent the Holy Spirit to be with us, to comfort us, to guide us. But spiritually, sometimes we don't see that. And so we're looking for something else. We're looking for a home. Everybody's looking for a home. Everybody wants to belong. Everybody wants that closeness and that intimacy somewhere, somehow in their life. And sometimes we don't know what we're looking for. We might not even be able to define what this home is in our life in different stages. And so sometimes it looks like money. Yeah, boy, if I had enough money, I'd be home free then. Yeah, buddy. Sometimes it looks like a job, a dream job, you know. Sometimes it looks like sex, drugs, and rock and roll, all the stuff that when I was growing up, parents got onto us about. But people that run off in different areas like that, they're looking for something. They're on a journey. There's a hole, and they're looking to fill it. And they're looking for home, really. It might be something good. It might be a wife and family and kids, but those can become, in a sense, idols of home as well if they replace a relationship with God. So even though we're made for a home and we're given, as it were, a home, sometimes we look elsewhere because we don't recognize the home we have. And that's what the prodigal son did. He went out looking for something that he already had, but didn't know that he had it. So we leave where we are. We're thinking that it's not home, that home must be elsewhere. It must be other circumstances. It must be different people. It must be a different worldview. And we do the thing and we say, I can find a better home than this. And so off we run. Father had surely discussed that with the son, tried to talk him out of it, I would imagine. I'm sure he didn't just say, hey, whatever you want, here, take your money and go. He probably had some long discussions, maybe some tearful discussions, a lot of talking to God himself about the situation. Why is my son leaving? How can he want to do that? Haven't I been a good father? Haven't I taken care of him? Haven't I given him everything he needs? But it didn't look that way to the son. He tried to convince him, I'm sure, of the benefits of home, but the son left. Let's read another quote here out of this book. This on page 95. Try not to make quotes too long because people fall asleep during long quotes, so don't want to do that. Here on 95, and I'll just read it because I have it typed out here as well. It says, as Father, he wants his children to be free. This is the Father in the story and our Father, God. As Father, he wants his children to be free to love. That freedom includes the possibility of their leaving home, going to a distant country, and losing everything. The Father's heart knows all the pain that will come from that choice, but his love makes him powerless to prevent it. You might say powerless. Is God powerless? Wait a minute. I thought God had all power. But he's chosen not to force himself on people. He's chosen to invite and to call and to be there at all points in time, but he's chosen not to force himself and force people to make decisions. Those are our free choices, and we make them. And I'm speaking to us as people, humans. I'm speaking to us because we have friends, maybe we have family members, we have coworkers, we have people that go through this process of leaving home and looking and searching in a distant country for something, and maybe you could be of help to them with some of these thoughts in your mind about where home is. So he allows the freedom. The Father will, in love, call and reach out, but we're not forced or imprisoned. He doesn't chain anybody to the walls of home. He lets us decide and choose. He has too much love to force himself on us. Some people say, well, why doesn't God take care of this? Why didn't he fix that? Why didn't he stop that from happening? Well, when you really think of love versus non-love, is it loving to force and to chain and to bind, or is it loving to let us choose and learn some of the lessons, sometimes the tough way? You know, when the son left home in the story, he went to another place. It says it doesn't tell us where that other place is. Again, it's just a parable. But he was lost, really. Now, he was somewhere. He knew where he was, sort of physically, as far as the geographical location. He knew who was around him, but in his soul, he was lost. He had lost his connection with home. He became lost, and it took maybe a time for that to happen. He probably partied good, it said, while he had money. He had lots of friends. Facebook friends. We all have lots of friends. Maybe when we have money or we have a nice car or whatever. And then somehow when we run out of stuff, sometimes our friends disappear. That's what happened with him. And so he slowly over time, as his pockets got empty, he became lost emotionally, became lost spiritually. He began to look around and go, what have I done? How stupid am I? Humbling, I'm sure. Wow, to admit that he'd made a wrong decision, maybe several wrong decisions. And here he was ending up where he was. He was at first excited, of course. He saw the activity. There was probably new people, friends. There was parties. There was all kinds of things going on. It looked good. It looked like, wow, this is home. This is better than where I was. This is great stuff. This is just what I was looking for. And then it turned out to not be so when he really got down to the undergirdings, to the grounding of what he was involved in. It was shallow, and it was temporary, and it was gone pretty soon. His values, his worldview, he thought would be changed, and it turned out, I guess, they really weren't. He still had that longing inside of him for the home that he had left, that he knew was there, and he had been there. He knew what it was like, and so he could compare this with that over time and see about the mistakes he had made. I asked myself this question as here in my notes, that have I ever left a familiar place and felt lost and confused in a new and different place? Have you ever done that? Have you ever moved somewhere, changed jobs, took on some other responsibility, and you were kind of in a good place here, but now you're in a new place and it just doesn't feel right? It can be very confusing, be very stressful. Kids leave home, they go to college. That's a big change right there. That's change for the kids. That's change for the parents for sure. Everybody gets stressed out over that, it seems like. A lot of times when kids go off to college or leave home, they get lost. They get lost. They find things that are not good. They journey through, test out some things that turn out to be bad in the end. And often then they'll look back and go, what about home? What could it be like if I were back home? Well, sometimes you can't go back home, although I guess they say young people do a lot of times now. But you can't really go back home. You can't go back to the way it was when you're 14 and 16 and 8, and those things have moved on. But there's something about home that we want to go back to, that we want to find a lot of times, because we get lost. And it can come at any point. It can come when we're younger. It can come when we're middle-aged. People get temptations of all kinds of things. Sexual temptations outside of a marriage, say. Job pressures to cook the books and kind of go along and kind of do some things that are sly in a job sometimes. There can be a lot of things that draw us away from home, from the foundation, from that key relationship that we have with God. And that can be pushed into the background as the pressures mount to participate and be involved in other things. And so we begin to ask our question, where is home? And what is home? Who is home? That's the next sermon. I can't go into that, but I'll leave you with those questions in mind. Let's go to the book one more time here. On page 43. And it says here, the prodigal sons know, that is, to his father, to stay. No, I'm leaving. The prodigal sons know reflects Adam's original rebellion. His rejection of the God in whose care we are created and by whose love we are sustained. It is the rebellion that places me, this is the author's writing it from the first person, and we could all put, the me could be all of us. It is a rebellion that places me outside the garden. It is the Garden of Eden, out of reach of the tree of life. It is the rebellion that makes me dissipate myself in a distant country. Hopefully we don't, but sometimes we might, and certainly we would know people who do. And again, it could be at any point of life along the way. So the prodigal son's no reflects Adam's original rebellion. And I've talked about that sometimes in sermon. I think that's a key part of the Bible. Is the first 3 chapters of the Bible are just huge in setting up the whole story of what happens from then on. And that Adam and Eve saying, really, here they are in the Garden of Eden with God, walking and talking with him. Is there anything that's more home than that? And what do? They choose to listen to someone else and to take and to eat and to turn their back on the tree and to be expelled from the garden. And they left home and were put out into a distant country, a far country, some say. We haven't been back to that place since. But we want to be back there. People want to be there. I think that's home. Maybe it won't be a physical garden with trees and fruit, and maybe that's, but home is that being with God in that kind of a relationship, that he's right there with us, and we just look, and he's our Father, and we can talk to him, and he talks to us, and we love him, and he loves us, and we know it, and everything around us is familiar and comfortable and safe and peaceful. That's home. Wow. But we haven't had that since the garden. I think people are looking for that. I think in our heart we know that that's there. We define it differently. People may not be religious. They may not have ever read the Bible. They may not know the Garden of Eden. They may not know the story. But even if they don't know any of that, they're looking in their lives for something that's solid, that real, that truthful, that peaceful. Whatever part of the world they're living in. And we go off looking in various places for that. Some people try to find it by, back in my younger days, became a hippie. You could find it in hippiedom, I guess. Society, I'm leaving society, I'm going to drop my LSD drugs and I'm going to go off in my own reality. And that was kind of a radical way to find it. And so that's pretty visible, pretty out there, that era. Some people become hermits. They go live in a cabin somewhere up in the Wyoming Badlands or the Colorado Mountains or the Virginia Hills, and they don't see people, and they just try to create their own little space. There's been times over history where people, famous people sometimes, have created communes. I was trying to remember who it was back in literature. Anyway, various times, and you've read about it, where people get their people together, and they either move to a place, or they outside of town and they build walls around it in a sense, and there they are, and they do things holistically and beautifully and share everything. And whatever happens to those? Any of them still going on, existing? Well, the ones that might have started last week are still going, but the ones that started a couple years ago, they're probably gone, because that's not home. That doesn't work. That doesn't replace what we're looking for in this God thing. So, be it a communes, hippies, hermits, whatever it is, that's not home. But people are looking. I think it's just a symptom that people look. And we may look like we have home. People can look like they can have a good job, they can have a good family, they can appear normal, they can coach the ball team, they can go to church. But if we don't know this God and who he is in relationship to us and what kind of love he puts forward to us, then we're still kind of looking. And that's okay. It's okay to look. It's okay to look. God hates it when we hurt ourselves when we look, when we bring up consequences that are really harmful to us. But sometimes it does take a search. It does take a period of looking, and then we find home again. I've heard the phrase, maybe you have too, that we all have a God-shaped hole in our heart. That's catchy. I picture of a chest, and there's this hole where your heart should be. And then it says the only thing that can fill fill that hole is God, is this relationship, is this coming to home with God. And I wonder where that came from. And I'll read you another quote from a guy named Blaise Pascal. Anybody ever heard of Blaise Pascal? He's some French writer from a couple hundred years ago. And he wrote a book, A Defense of Christianity, and used a lot of big words in the way they did back then. But here's this little section where that phrase sort of came out of this. Those words aren't exactly there, but this is his description of that concept. He says, "What else does this craving and this helplessness proclaim but that there was once in a man a true happiness, of which all that now remains is the empty print and trace? This he tries in vain to fill with everything around him, seeking in things that are not there the help he cannot find in those that are, though none can help, since this infinite abyss can be filled only with an infinite and immutable object. In other words, by God himself." So he's saying, built into our lives is an infinite abyss. And the only thing that can fill something infinite is something else infinite. And so we look for God. We may not call him God, we may not use that word, but that's what we're looking for. Interesting here, back to Luke chapter 15, as we near the conclusion here. Preachers always say that. They don't really mean it. They just say that because it gives you some hope that they're going to quit. Luke 15, verses 17 through 19. It says, "When he came to his senses, the son, he said, 'How many of my father's hired servants have food to spare, and here I am starving to death. I will set out and go back to my father and say to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I'm no longer worthy to be called your son. Make me like one of your hired servants.'" That's the speech. Making out his speech. Have we ever done that? You ever done that? Got in trouble when you were young. You knew you were in trouble. You knew you had been around the corner of the house, squatted down, smoking on the cigarette butt your parent had thrown away, that it didn't go out. They sort of stomped on it, but not good enough. And you were over there. I know. It's not you I saw doing it. My mother's laughing over here. She knows. And so you get your speech ready because they come around and go, "What are you doing?" "Well, I was," and you try to get this thing ready where you sound all repentant and like, "Well, it was my fault. It was Susie's fault. She gave it to me." Whatever. So we get our speech ready. And I thought it was interesting in the book, he says, why all the speech making? Ever wondered that? Because it says, when he tried to give that speech to his father, what was his father's reaction? It says his father wasn't listening. He'd already ordered the feast to be started and the calf to be killed. But the son felt like, well, I gotta get this speech all ready here. So what does it say here on page 52 of the book? It says, why all the speech making? The reason is clear. Although claiming again the author's from his viewpoint, although claiming my true identity as a child of God, I still live as though the God to whom I am returning demands an explanation. I still think about his love as conditional and about home as a place I am not yet sure of. So even when we go back, if we've been away, or we stay if we haven't been away, what's our view of that home? Is that relationship conditional? Like, well, as long as I stay within this box, then I'm okay. And God is ready to zap me with a lightning bolt just the minute I veer to the right or to the left away from this just a tad. Is that what it is? And if I have been away from God, and I've heard this as a pastor, or you probably heard it, I talk to people and they're living some, like I said, dissipated lifestyle. Hey, there they are. That's the reality. That's where they are. And I'm talking to them, say, God loves you. Come on back. It's fine. The door's open. There's no judgment here. There's no condemnation. Come back. And they're like, oh, I can't. I'm not good enough. I've got to get it together first. I've got to be right. It's like a story I heard. I didn't think of this, but I was listening to a guy give a talk on a CD, and he said it's kind of like if you're driving down the road and you have a wreck, and there you are. You're out laying on the side of the road, and you're bleeding, and your bones sticking out through your leg because it's broke, and you got a concussion. you're just a mess, you know, your arm's all scraped up. And so people show up to help you out, and they're an ambulance, and they're like, well, come on, let's get in the ambulance. No, I can't get in the ambulance. I'm in too bad a shape. I'm going to go home I'm going to hobble home, you know, just get me in the car, and I'll stop the bleeding as best I can, and I'll use one leg to drive home because the other one's broken, and I'll get home, and I'll try to splint things up, and I'll try to piece myself together. And once I kind of get healing pretty good, look pretty normal, and everything's kind of, then I'll let you take me to the hospital. Sometimes that's the way we think about God. You know, like, well, once I get better, then I'll come to God and say, hey, here I am. And he's like, you're not getting any better. You're what you are. We are what we are. Just come on back anyway. You know, I love you the way you are. Come on back. So again, if you got people in your life, share that story with them. Let them know that they don't need a speech. God's heard all the speeches. He really doesn't care to listen anymore. He'd just rather have the person. He'd just rather have the relationship. He'd just rather them be there with each other. And we'll deal with the rest of it as time goes along. But we all have an I am not complex. I'm not worthy. I'm not loved. I'm not good enough. I'm not appreciated. I'm not repentant enough. We get into that as human beings. It's natural, but that's not the way God's designed it. And that's not the way he thinks. He doesn't care if we earn or re-earn or re-earn his love, because it's not for sale. It's not up for earning. It's a free gift. Doesn't care if we meet conditions, because he doesn't set conditions. Doesn't care if we try to prove our value or fix things first, because that's not our job. It's way above our pay grade. That's his job. You know, when you're giving a speech, when the guy's giving his speech, I was thinking the focus is still on himself. That's the whole deal. He realizes a mistake, and now it's about how can I make myself look better or go present my case and get my father to somehow, you know, judge this. But the focus is on him. The focus is not on the father, because he never knew the father, apparently. He really didn't know his own dad very well. Or he would have known that his dad would have been waiting at the end of the driveway day after day, looking out, just waiting to see a little dust come up over the horizon and say, is that my son? Is that my boy? And he was there waiting for him every day. No conditions, no fix it, no make it right. Just come home. Just come home. The heart of the Father, he writes here, burns with an immense desire to bring his children home, or to keep them at home, to keep them safe, to keep them close, to keep them intimate and trusting. So we go on down to the rest of the story, and I won't read the verses, but verses 20 through 24 remind us what happened, that the father was waiting, and he was looking, and he did accept, and he did put the robe and the ring back on him, and he did call for the big feast, and they celebrated. It was all good. It was all good stuff. There was no duties, no rules, nothing he had to do. It was pure love. It was overwhelming acceptance. It was unbridled joy, and it was celebration. That's what went on when the son returned home. Here in this little book, Parable of the Dancing God, and I'd love for y'all to have one of these. It doesn't take more than a week or two to read. Okay, it takes like 30 minutes or an hour. But this is an amazing little book, and I brought some extra copies. I'd love for y'all to walk out with one before you leave if you don't have one. So I'll put them back on the table, or look me up. I'll keep a couple in my pocket, and be sure you grab one. But he says here on page 16, really closing this time. See, last time I just said getting close or heading toward closing, but this time I'm going to go ahead and commit to close, because this is short. It says this story, the story we are talking about, is about a son who is and remains a son or daughter because he has a father who is and remains a father. The story is about a sinner coming to his senses and encountering the truth of who he is because of who God is. This is about a son encountering the truth that he has a home, he has a father, He has an inheritance that he cannot squander. This is about coming to know God, coming to know and believe the good news of the Father's immutable heart. So it's just one story in the Bible. It's just one little parable. It's just one little tiny book. And that's even all the guys' comments about it in that little book. So I just think it's an amazing story. I think it tells us a lot about home being where our heart is. And if our heart is in that relationship, desiring and wanting that relationship with God, then we'll see that that's our home. God our Father stands always with open arms on the road to his home, to our home, because that's the home we share. He greatly desires for everyone to recognize home, to cherish home, to stay home or to come home, to rest and grow in and inherit home, and to share in the party of celebration, now and forever. So let's enjoy the home that God's prepared for us in himself.